today it's a great pleasure to introduce you to an exhibition which is very close to my heart. It's an exhibition of medieval treasures from the Victoria and Albert Museum under the title Quand les Anglais parlaient français, when the English spoke French. It's one of a series of 3 exhibitions that the Thani Collection will be hosting from the Victoria and Albert Museum, which look very closely at the artistic and the cultural relationship between England and continental Europe, in particular France. This is when the kings of England are also major landholders in France. In some moments, the kings of England actually own more land in France than does the King of France. But it's a period of dynamic exchange in terms of ecclesiastical partnership. It's also a moment of great movement in craftsmanship and in artisanship. The exhibition sheds light on artistic exports from England into the wider European world.
England's medieval past is a partial knowledge for us because so much was destroyed at the time of the religious Reformation after about the 1530s, so after about 1535. So essentially our medieval past really doesn't exist in the way that it does in France or in other countries in Europe. The Gloucester Candlestick is one of the signature pieces in the exhibition for more than one reason. It dates from the 12th century, from around 1107 to 1113. It's a masterpiece of medieval bronze casting, but it's also a unique survival, and it demonstrates the kind of superlative skills that were employed by goldsmiths in England in the 12th century. It's the only extant example of its type. It survives only because it left the country in the Middle Ages, probably in the 1120s, and certainly before 1122. The candlestick is bronze, but it's gilded. It represents this incredible unfurling of scenes of animals and human figures writhing within tendrils. And it's really setting out a sort of battle between vice and virtue. Among the many gifts that were made between monasteries and abbeys and cathedrals were the relics of saints, and the fame of Britain's only international saint, St. Thomas Beckett, was spread through the dispersal of his relics throughout Europe. So we know that these beautifully enamelled containers were travelling across Europe with the relics of Thomas Beckett inside them. And on the Becket Casket, on the front face, we have the murder of Becket, which took place at Canterbury Cathedral in 1170, December 29th, and becomes an absolutely sensational event right throughout Europe. It's an act of sacrilege that shocks the whole of Christendom, murdered in the nave of his own cathedral. Within 3 years, he's made a saint, and then the production of these reliquaries starts in earnest in Limoges. England is most famous for its alabaster production, particularly in the later Middle Ages, from the late 14th century right through the 15th century and right up to the brink of Reformation in the early 16th century. They're exported from as far afield as Iceland to Poland to Portugal. The 12 apostles that you see here are from the province of Zamora, from a church in the province of Zamora. They were made in England and exported to Spain. The head of St. John the Baptist, however, is more highly individualized. It's a much more artistically accomplished piece of work. It's also shudderingly realistic in the way that it represents the moment of death. It's a very sobering image that was used to promote piety, and particularly in the early 16th century there was a great affection for these works for that very reason, because they helped people feel closer to God through the agency of the saints.
One of the really splendid pieces that we have in the exhibition here is a cope, which is a cloak worn by a priest, and it's called the Scion cope. It's an example of the collaboration between artists and silk workers and embroiderers who would have all been working in and around the city of London in the late 13th and early 14th century. The very materials speak of the long-standing and very ancient trade routes that crisscrossed Europe and the Middle East, because even to create these remarkable works of art, they needed silk and gold and silver threads to make their threads. So all of these came through the trading networks that existed.
I think one of the things that we like to highlight in the exhibition is that there's a great deal of technical skill and expertise that's expended by medieval artists, more perhaps than modern day observers would appreciate. So what's beautiful about what this exhibition evokes is it gives us a glimpse into the lost past. These things have not been seen in this kind of juxtaposition before. It's the first exhibition of its type that really tries to reconstruct what medieval England might have looked like between 1000 and 1500. The whole range of medieval output is represented in this room, and of course it's an extremely lavish and opulent display.
Surviving examples of outstanding English medieval art are very few, and this is our great joy, is really to be able to bring these rare surviving treasures of medievalism in England here to Paris.